The electric locomotive whistled, the train jerked, and the Moscow-Vladivostok passenger train set off on its long journey. Passengers exhaled, behind the bustle of the station. Ahead for a few days, only stations and stations. Behind the window there is a measured clatter of wheels. On one of the seats in the parlor car sat a girl. She was looking out the window, but it was clear at once that she was not interested in the picture of the city disappearing. With every minute, she was in her own thoughts, and these thoughts were obviously not happy. The girl was almost crying. Honey called out to her an elderly woman, a neighbor in the parlor. "Why are you sad?" "Let's have some tea, shall we?" "I've got smoked chicken. All the pies are fresh." "My name is Camille, by the way." "And you're Emily?" melancholically answered the girl, and immediately shook. Added, "Thank you. I do not want anything." "That's you in vain." In the train, it is the most important thing. "Ooh, that food." Camille smiled. "I've been so used to it since I was young. When I got on the carriage, my hand would reach for a cookie or something else." "It's a beauty." You sit, look out the window, chew pies, eat them." "No, I'm not used to it. You won't." Disappointed, asked the old woman, and, leaning heavily on the table, stood up. "Okay, I'll go get tea myself." Emily came to her senses when she saw how hard the woman was getting up. "I'll bring tea bags," Camille agreed, and handed the girl 2 bags. Emily finally smiled. That old woman is cunning. She had practically forced her to keep her company. After she and Camille ate delicious cabbage pies with pieces of chicken, which they broke with their hands, and it was delicious. And all the bad thoughts suddenly evaporated. All the problems seemed to go away. Emily smiled as she listened to his old lady. And Camille was glad to have such a nice traveling companion. She likes to talk. "I came to the capital, didn't I?" "I came, had a glass of sweet tea," said the old woman. "My son is a fool, married for the 5th time for 40 years, but he still can't settle down. He was a bully with his first wife and had 2 kids. 4 years later, he got divorced. She kicked him out because she couldn't stand his nakedness. And he went to the registry office 3 times in a row. Good thing he didn't insure the kids. And then the other day he calls Mom. I'm getting married. I'm calling him again. And he just laughs. Parasite. His 5th child will be born soon. I came to see the new dog. Seems normal. They were all normal. Oh, son, I pity the fool. I had him too late, almost 30 years old. I raised him myself. My husband died, Kevin, before he was a year old. I spent my whole life feeling sorry for him. He's a fool." Camille sighed heavily and looked at Emily carefully. "Why are you being so mean? In the beginning, you didn't want to leave. Or didn't your fiancé see you off? It was nothing." He shook his head further, making it clear that she was not ready to pour out her soul. It is generally believed that fellow travelers on the train better than any psychologist and listen and advise, and the main thing then forget. Because more with each other are unlikely to meet. But Emily was not accustomed to be frank, so she listened to Camille about her wayward son. She nodded and agreed when she should, and she seemed at ease. But by nightfall, when Camille had gone to bed, Emily was again overcome by heavy thoughts. What should she do next? The wheels pounded measuredly, and her heart pounded even in the excitement. Then the thoughts from that Lumed. And it seemed to fall asleep began, as at a small station to them. Finally sat down 2 more fellow travelers, 2 middle-aged men. And so long they rearranged their bags, then on the top shelves all, the rest of the sleep. She sat down at the table and stared out the window again. The black forest flashed by the glass at breakneck speed. The huge moon kept up with the train and seemed to look right into the soul. Emily felt another pang in her stomach. Until a week ago, everything in her life had been easy and simple. It had been a year since she had worked in a decent firm. After the institute, it was a great luck to get a job in this trading company. Emily came practically from the street, just saw an ad that required an employee and decided to try her luck. Then she went for an interview. There were such girls there, wow, expensively dressed, perfectly painted, tall, slender. And no, she had a nice figure too. But she never had money for expensive clothes, just to scrape together a rented apartment. And she, after graduating from the Faculty of Foreign Languages of one of the capital's universities, had no luck whatsoever. She couldn't find a job. As it turned out, the director didn't really care about the shell. He required impeccable knowledge of Italian, as their firm began to work with foreign partners. The brand name girls had fallen off the wagon. With English, they still poorly managed, but with Italian in general, the matter is a mess. And when Emily read a simple text in Italian and immediately translated it, the director immediately sent her to the HR department to write a job application. Oh, how those girls looked at her. Even the director's secretary was a little shocked. And this gray mouse is hired by the chief, but there's nothing to be done. And Emily was so happy. An interesting job, a decent salary. What more could she ask for? And the director, John, turned out to be a perfectly adequate man. He was also a very interesting man. She didn't even realize how it had gone down. But in a couple of months, their romance was gaining momentum. Emily already dreamed of a wedding, rings, and so on. Suddenly, it all came crashing down. She thought that the chief was not married, and no one at the firm told her anything. Then one day, a woman in her 40s showed up at the office. She was beautiful. Tall blonde, tastefully dressed. Only she looked down on everyone. She asked herself, nodding nonchalantly at the door, John. Wendy, the chief's secretary, was even in the reception area at the time. Yes, Wendy nodded obligingly. And when the woman disappeared behind the door, looked mockingly at Emily and appeared at last. Who is it? Even our John's wife was surprised. Jink! Tan had apparently returned from her Paris trip, so he's married. Confusedly muttered about Emily. You thought? Wendy laughed. A long time ago. And by the way, his wife owns the firm. That's how he runs it. I just didn't know the right person to tell you, so it's our John who slept with half the office. And every girl was dreaming he'd look at her again. And then you. The girls were offended. That's why they stayed silent. And you. I thought you and I were having a normal conversation. What about me? It's none of my business. Wendy smirked. And I had nothing to do with my boss. My husband's enough for me. What did you expect? I thought it was a wiretap. You come into the office, and the first handsome guy is yours. That's not how it works. Yes, it does. He loves me. Emily stormed out of the waiting room, and the news made her want to move on. She was holding on with all her might. So John's married? I mean, she's like 10 years older than him. Money, of course. But he loves her, Emily. He said so himself. Why didn't he tell me about his wife? It was so hurtful. Emily felt used and discarded. She herself did not understand how she worked until the evening, and all the time she felt the mocking and glances of her colleagues. But Emily tried to ignore it. She waited for John to summon her to his office or to come into her office himself. But at the 6th hour, she saw through the window as John and Jean walked out of the office. Walking, laughing about something. And so happy. She wanted to quit. I even wrote a letter to the receptionist and took it to the office. Wendy took it with a sneer. To her rented apartment, came back and cried at Zero. And in the morning, she got a call from her boss. Emily, what's that statement on my desk? Asked John. Like nothing happened? You don't understand. You lied to me? You didn't tell me anything about your wife, and I believed you. I can't work with you after that. Emily, what a stupid thing to say. John grinned. Jean and I have been separated for a long time. Yes, she is my wife. But that doesn't mean anything. She has her own private life. I have mine. We don't divorce everything because Jean is basically the mistress of everything. And her father left this firm in his will. It's convenient for her. I make money. She lives off the interest. Why didn't you tell me all this in the first place? Why would you, a little girl who takes everything so personally? I would have told you everything later. Come on, don't be silly. Go back to the firm. We have so much work to do. We're about to sign a contract with the Italians, and that's the only reason. No, of course not. Deep, I love you. And Emily believed it. She's happy. It's not easy for her, but John loves her. And he may be married. But he explained everything, and time will pass, and they'll be together. She even came back. Colleagues at the firm looked at her with interest. They thought she'd have a scandal. Emily, happy as an elephant with her boss, goes out of the office in the evenings. They're leaving together. Jean, have you gone abroad again? Another 6 months passed. During this time, several successful contracts were concluded thanks to successful negotiations where Emily acted as a translator. John was still with her. John was gone. And after some more time, Emily realized that something was happening to her. No, she knew exactly what was happening to her. She even wanted it and thought that now everything would change. Yes, Emily was pregnant. Now John would divorce Jean and marry her. And there would be no trouble with the firm. According to John, Jean was a perfectly adequate woman. She should understand. What is the deadline? John asked John businesslike. When Emily told him that she had just come from the antenatal clinic. 7 weeks. That's normal. You haven't had your checkups yet? No, I just got all my appointments. Well, let's do it now. We need to know right away if everything's okay. I mean, honey, are you happy? Me? Yeah, very. John nodded his head absent-mindedly. Listen, let's talk more later. There's a lot of work right now, and there really was a lot of work. And in the evening, they walked around the city, sitting in a small restaurant. John, when are we getting married? Emily finally asked. Married? John's eyebrows went up in surprise. Yes, a little later. We have to hurry while we're still on the clock. I don't want to have a tummy at the wedding. John looked thoughtfully at Emily and nodded again, but the proposal never came. A couple weeks later, Emily overheard a conversation that turned her life upside down. That day, she left work early to go to the women's clinic, and after the consultation, she remembered that she had left her computer on in a hurry and decided to come back, even though it was late. The security guard at the entrance was pleased and said that John was still there. Emily quickly ran into the office. Indeed, the computer was not turned off. Clicked the mouse and immediately headed into the office to see the supervisor. In the reception area, Wendy was no longer there. The door to Wendy's office was slightly ajar. Emily heard her lover talking to someone on the phone. Yes, that's right. She's pregnant. Emily heard John's voice and froze in place. Jean, I haven't talked to her yet. She wants a wedding. Then John laughed. It sent shivers down Emily's spine. He said the wedding thing with such disdain. I'm gonna stall the wedding as long as I can. And then I have to corner her into giving me the baby herself. Of course, that's months away. Jean, darling, bear with me. I'll pretend to be in love. What do we do now? We need a child. How many more of these useless attempts? And who's the real live baby? And it's definitely mine. Emily cautiously peeked into the office through the open door and saw John. He was sitting with his feet up on the table, talking on the phone and staring at the ceiling. Emily didn't notice. And she wanted to barge in, throw something heavy at him, yell at him, and leave. She'd heard the worst part. She was being used. They want her baby, not her. But how could that be possible? She had no strength to stay there any longer and rushed down the stairs. She didn't notice that through the window, John watched her run out of the office.
And he had a very worried look on his face. He then called Emily, as if nothing had happened. But Emily. She yelled at him and hung up on him. And the next day, the doorbell of her rented apartment rang. Jean stood on the threshold. "Hello, Emily," Jean said with a grin, measuring the girl with her gaze. "So that's how you are?" "Normal for an incubator will do." "Who are you and what do you want?" quietly asked Even. "Just don't pretend you don't know me."
Jean also said with a grin, "We need to talk."
And she entered the apartment without waiting for an invitation, almost pushing Emily away with her shoulder. Walked around the room, looked disdainfully at the simple kitchen. "So you live here, and I can offer you better conditions." "I don't understand you," Fawn mumbled, and further her heart pounded frantically. She was so confused that she didn't know what to say. "Now you will understand everything," answered Jean. She stood in front of Emily with a glance and said in an orderly tone, "Listen and do not interrupt." And then Emily heard something that made the hair on her head stand on end. "You think I knew nothing about your affair with my husband?" Jean began. "No, darling. I was aware of it from the very beginning of your relationship. In fact, I myself suggested that he find some fool and impregnate her." "Why? It's simple. I need a baby. I happen to be unable to have children as the years go by. Especially since I'm a little older than John. I even wanted to get one from the orphanage, and then I thought, what's the point of having a healthy man around? But none of the women who've borne us a child before have been too clever. You're talking about a cowgirl, and you've got a money problem, and you're not stupid, so the baby should be all right. That's why I suggested we hook up. I saw your personnel file. And John, what's in it for him? You're saying terrible things? Emily flared up. I don't believe you, but I don't believe you either. You listen, it's true, I've had a lot of trouble with you. No, Dora. Turns out I was on the pill. And then she quit because she thought you and John were serious. You guessed? She's not answering. I know you're the only one who's wrong, girl. John's not gonna leave me, and he doesn't need you. He needs a baby. And so do I. In her mind, Emily practically whispered, feeling her legs fail. She barely had time to sit on the stool. What baby? Oh, don't be silly, laughed Jean. I know you're pregnant. John said yes. I have already made inquiries at the antenatal clinic. Soon you'll be 10 weeks. Your tests are perfect. Don't be surprised. I know all about you. And I've been following you all the time, and I wasn't always abroad, like John told you, while you were screwing around with John at our place. I was living quietly in my other apartment. Oh, Denmark is getting pale. I'm not jealous of you. You're having our baby. What makes you so sure I'm giving it to you? It's my baby, dared Emily, and looked into Jean's eyes. Emily, calmly replied Jean, and how you will give it to me. Think about it. How you will raise him. On what? Not even hope for a job. You're right out of it if you start fooling around. Where will you go when you're pregnant? Who's going to take you with a potbelly? Nobody. You can't survive in the capital without money. Or do you want to go back to your village? Who's your alcoholic mother? The stepfather who molested you in high school. Don't be surprised, I know all about you. Good detective. I dug up your whole background in a week. I know you ran away from home after high school to avoid your family. Lucky me. Well, you passed your exams, got into college, studied, worked. Good for you. But what's the use? You don't have any money anyway. I'm offering you a deal. You won't give us your child for free. I'll buy you an apartment, give you a lot of money. You won't need anything. So you want to buy it? Biting your lip? Emily asked. Yes, I do, Jeanne replied with a smile. Agree. During the pregnancy, you will be seen in the best clinic, not in that shabby place where you went. I'll rent you a nice apartment. Do you really like living in that bedbug house? Vitamins, food, clothes, everything. I'll buy you a full settlement when you give birth. So you think you can just buy everything? Emily got up, made her way over, and looked calmly at the guest. Yes, easily. Get out. Quietly but firmly, said Emily, so that your spirit will not be here. I don't need anything from you. Fuck you all to hell. You and John yours. That's how Jeanne raised her eyebrows. All right, I'll pretend I didn't hear that. I know it's a lot to think about. Anyway, make up your mind. Tomorrow we'll come with John to your place of work. You know, you don't have to go. I'll let you. Jeanne headed for the door and turned around at the entrance. I was talking to you nicely. Keep in mind, if you refuse, we'll force you. I have such possibilities. She looked coldly at the girl and left, slamming the door. And then she stood leaning against the wall. It seemed to her that she had just been poured a bowl of mud on her, and there was such an emptiness in her soul. She invented love. Suddenly, she thought that she could be loved by a rich, successful man, even if he was married. After all, everything with his wife is in the past. She's his present and his future. But no, she was just used. She had everything decided for her? Yeah, like an incubator. It was nothing like that. Emily whispered to herself. This is my baby, and I'm not giving it to anyone. And then she stared out the window for a long time, wondering what she should do. Should she call John? Why? She had heard everything herself when he was on the phone. Then Jeanne explained everything. She didn't want to see or hear from him anymore, but she had to think how to move on. Where would she go now? Yes, Jeanne was well aware of Emily's life. Her own father had been killed in a sawmill when a log snapped and crushed him to death. Her mom, beautiful and smart, a saleswoman at the local village store, was so worried. And then she started drinking and gradually got sober. She got kicked out of her job. There was no trace of her former beauty left. And when Emily was in 10th grade, she brought a boyfriend home. David is a nasty man. Emily's mom, Svetlana, used to give Emily all the water. He used to look at Emily himself. She was in 11th grade when he started hitting on her, and she barely waited. Emily got her exam results and went to the capital city. With what money? She took from her mother the emerald earrings her father had given her. And Svetlana kept them safe. She hasn't disappeared yet, as she even decided she needed them more. She sold them at a pawn shop and used the money to rent a room. She was sure she'd be able to get into university, where she dreamed of, and she did. Then she studied, worked. Her mother found her phone number, called her when she was drunk. Oh, she swore. Cursed her daughter, called her all kinds of names. But Emily was sure she'd done the right thing. She decided that she would go to work after university, buy similar earrings, and pay off her mother. But so far, of course, she hadn't bought anything. What do we do now? Go to my mother's. David is there, and her mother is angry with her, and she'll show up with a belly. Or maybe try to stay in the capital and ignore Jeanne and John? No matter what Jeanne said to them. Emily decided to stay, and her daughter will find another job. Everything will work out for her. She's not alone now. She has someone to live for. And in the morning, she was awakened by the doorbell. Then a loud knock. Emily just had time to turn the lock before the door opened under pressure, and she came face to face with John. Behind him stood John and a couple of stout men. So get ready. Without looking Emily in the eye, John said, "You right now, moving to another place, where you and the baby will be comfortable." I'm not going anywhere, exclaimed Emily. John, how can you do that? You said those words to me? You swore you loved me? He promised a lot of things. John laughed. Silly. I thought you understood everything yesterday. I have to explain everything to you all over again. Emily, you're a big girl. Why all this melodrama? We'll help you. You told us, John. Why don't you just pack your things and let's go? Otherwise, we'll see you by force. And he nodded his head toward the tough guys. Emily shook with horror. What was even going on? How can it be like this? I'll go to the police, she threatened. Let's go. Gina laughed. The police are already here. And one of the guys took out an ID card. Emily realized that there was nothing she could do. Okay, she nodded. Give me half an hour and please wait for me downstairs at the entrance. All right, John agreed. You can't run away anyway. We'll wait for you further down. Don't be silly. John told her one last time and went down the stairs with his wife and 2 attendants. Emily. She quickly left her belongings in her bag, grabbed her documents. Her plan had matured lightning fast. The entrance to the attic was always open. Always open, and there where you could go down through the attic to the other entrance. Emily knew it well because the residents often argued that the attics were not closed and that all sorts of scum were lost in them all the time. Emily cautiously looked out of the apartment. No one. She climbed up higher. Yes, she was in luck. The attic was open again. Now the main thing was to get the other attic open, and that's where the luck came in. Emily went down the stairs, came out through another entranceway, looked back. Jean and John were sitting in the car. Apparently the 2 guys were standing by the bench, looking at the door of the entranceway, from which they were waiting for Emily. She took a quick step toward the bus stop. Yes, this was her day. Immediately, a shuttle bus pulled up, and only when the girl was already riding in it, she realized that, of course, the shuttle bus had a train station. Yes, fate itself was showing her the way to where to go, only to her mother. There was nowhere else. Svetlana would take her in. Now the girl tried not to think about it. And once again, she was lucky. She had bought a ticket to the placard carriages and a lower shelf. Now her way lay home, in a distant Siberian village to her mother. And now in the night, trying to sleep under the clatter of wheels, the girl thought about one thing: how she would appear in front of her mother and how she was drinking now. Yes, of course she drinks. Only a month ago she found out from an acquaintance that in the capital now lived. And recently she went to her homeland for a visit. In the morning, Emily was awakened by the smell of aromatic coffee and the annoying smell of instant noodles. Another time would have been okay. But right now, Emily felt like she was sick to her stomach. Barely made it to the bathroom. She came back pale. The male companions looked at her sympathetically. "What were you rocking?" asked one of them. Emily nodded her head slightly, rubbing her temples. It seemed to feel better. Camille, on the other hand, said nothing. Just looked at the girl carefully. Then, long conversations with the traveling companions of the station, the forest outside the window. About lunchtime, the men headed for the restaurant. "Maybe keep us company, too." One of them winked at Emily. The girl only smiled and shook her head as they left. Camille started rummaging through her bag. "Oh, I found it." She smiled, pulling out a huge burgundy-red pomegranate. "Eat it. Do you need it now? What are you talking about?" Blushing somehow from the pomegranates, asked Emily. "Tom," Camille answered simply. I've worked half my life in a maternity ward. I thought you were heavy yesterday. Now I can see exactly how far along you are." "A week, 10, 12, 10, Emily admitted. "I see," smiled Camille. "You need to eat well on the road now. Be careful. You'll get to Novosibirsk. and I'll get off a little earlier, but I'll keep an eye on you. Who's going to meet you? No one's waiting for me. Suddenly, Emily admitted bitterly, intercepting the pomegranate in the palm of her hand. I don't understand what to do at all. And then she told everything to this restless and kind old woman, who had thought yesterday that it was foolish and unwise to pour out her soul on the train. Camille listened and only frowned. But the matter, she said, when Emily was silent. So even though you go to your mother, there is no hope that she will let you go. Does it work like that? Barely holding back tears, Emily said. Listen, so maybe not to ruin your life? It can still be fixed, right? No, not at all, said Emily, frightened, realizing what Camille was getting at. We've already been through so much with our baby. No, I can't. And rightly so. Unexpectedly supported the old woman. I was just asking to check. I see, a good girl, but in people wrong, the wrong one gave her love. But that's all right. Time heals. Do I have a proposition for you? Camille smiled slyly and squinted. After all, after I took a well-deserved retirement house in the district center, sold and went to a small village, now there are only 10 residential yards. And you know, I like it. It's nice and quiet. 10 yards, a store, a health center. What do you mean? How long has it been closed? How do you live there? I live just fine. I also have a nephew from my younger sister. He brings me everything I ask for. He'll take me to the hospital if I need him. He's a beginning farmer, a good guy. But that's not what I mean. If you don't have a place to live, I can help you. It may come as a shock to you after the capital, but it's not a bad option. Come to my place. It's in the middle of nowhere, but it's nice, fresh air. You still need it now? I have a vegetable garden. If you don't want to live with me, there's an empty house next to mine. Not even any furniture inside. The owners went to their children in Germany and left the house. No one will buy it in the middle of nowhere. To dismantle it, I couldn't afford it. They built it with their own hands. My neighbors said, if he's a good man, let him live with God. So I think this is the right house for you. How can I live there? No medical center, no store. Will you be all right? My Stephen will always take me and bring me back. And it's not that far to the district center. The kids will be born there. We'll see. Maybe then you'll find something in the district center. Maybe you'll meet a good man. Go ahead. So on what grounds will I live with you? I have to register at the polyclinic. Oh, I found care for my house. I'm the landlady. I can register whoever I want. I have a long-standing friendship with the wife of the head of our village council. She'll register me. She even promised to think about it. It was scary to rush into the unknown like that. But to go to her mother, who was clearly not happy, was a daughter, was even more frightening. By evening, Emily made up her mind and gave her consent. That's right, dear, smiled Camille. You'll see. Everything will be fine for you. The next day, they got off at a small station. Literally at once, a tall, sturdy young man with a huge tan came running up to the carriage. He picked up Camille, embraced her. My favorite aunt! Thunderously, he said. At the guests of the capital, at the guest, Stephen laughed Camille. Kevin, I was a fool, and I'm still a fool. And I need to go to the fields. And he'll set you up with a date house. He's a parasite. Oh, come on! A man lives for his own pleasure. Stephen put the aunt on the ground, picked up her suitcase, and only now noticed the girl who was standing a little further away, timidly looking in their direction. The man looked questioningly at Camille. This is Emily. She will live with me, and then, if she wants to, she will move into the neighbor's house. What? They've gone to Germany? They know. And they'll be grateful that the house is looked after. Enough reasoning, we are already everywhere. Stephen obediently shut up and went to the car. Camille and Emily followed him. Emily had the unknown ahead of her, which frightened her very much. But at the same time, she went forward boldly, confident that this time she would do the right thing. After about half an hour of driving on the dirt road, a village appeared. Emily inwardly cringed. Where was she even going? No, she'd grown up in a village too, but she'd never seen such wilderness. It seemed that there was no life here, and there were only abandoned huts and weeds around. But when they drove into the village, Emily realized that there are still people here. There's a derelict cottage over there, further on too. My property, smiled Camille. She pointed to a log cabin with carved shutters, a palisade, and blooming daisies and raspberries. Beautiful, Emily said. It's my outlet, Camille admitted. You'll see my vegetable garden. My aunt is an agronomist, Stephen joked. It's a family thing, she replied. And when they got out of the car, she pointed to the neighboring house. There's the house I was talking about. Emily stared at the house, boarded up shutters and doors. In the yard is trouble above human height. Don't worry, and we'll put everything in order. Understanding the confusion, the girl said Camille. But that's later. It was cozy at Grandma Valley's. Emily even smiled. It looked like what my parents had before my dad died. Candles everywhere, a white tablecloth on the hall table. After tea, Stephen left on business, and Camille lay down to rest for a while. Emily was tucking in, but she decided to go for a walk in the village. Yes, she'd never been in the middle of nowhere like this before. The girl felt a little homesick. Why had she come here? No, she had to go to her mother's house, but it was her soulmate. And then she remembered the eternal partying in the house, and her heart sank. She did the right thing. This village was her only refuge at the moment. Emily went back to Grandma Vala's yard and looked at the flower bed. It should be watered. The girl found a watering can, dealt with the summer plumbing. There's a faucet by the porch. Soon all the flower beds were filled. Lola wanted to go to the vegetable garden, but she decided it wasn't worth it without a mistress. Then you, Camille, woke up. What are you doing in the heat? The old woman was swearing vigorously. Come inside. Your head's already hot. If you don't think of yourself, think of the child. She was carrying that watering can too. Why are you lifting weights? It's okay. Camille. Watering can is only 8 liters, the girl smiled. I feel so good here. I can breathe easier. Easier, you know. Yes, in your city it's not clear what the air is made of. It's almost like a nature reserve. Have a good time. By lunchtime, Camille was already busy in the kitchen. She even lay down a little. Soon from the kitchen smelled fragrant borscht. The villagers are having lunch. And over the meal, Camille talked about her nephew, Stephen. He's a good man. He lives in the district center. My late sister's apartment there was left to him in his 30s. He's never been married. Where do the girls look? He studied agronomy at the institute before joining the army. He was thinking of farming then. But things went wrong. He fell in love with a whore? She blew his brains out, and then she married someone else. Stephen signed a contract and went into the service. Then he got wounded and came back to his native land. What's there to do? He did some paperwork through the Pathorsarefier employment center there. They gave him some money to develop a farm, so he's been working the fields ever since. And his place is not far from our village. It's a pity, he's a good guy. Camille was silent for a while, as if gathering his thoughts, and continued, I see you're not a bad girl, you're confused. Just live here with your thoughts. Get yourself together and take a closer look at my Stephen. Maybe it'll work out. I don't think so. Emily shook her head. It's not love I have to think about now. I don't know if I did the right thing coming here. I'm going to have a baby. And how is it here with him? And for what? There's no work here. I'm a foreign language teacher. Who would I teach here? But the school's long gone. Camille agreed. Well, that's no problem. You'll be here for a month or two, and then decide what to do. I've got money and a vegetable garden, and I'm telling you to look at my Stephen. He won't hurt you. Why would he want me with someone else's child? I even asked him. He doesn't know me, and I didn't know you, but I invited you along. You're a good man. I can see that there's going to be a child. That's good. A new life will be born. Emily listened to the old woman and thought of something else. Not long ago, she was living in the city, making plans for the future. Then she was so cruelly spent. And now, sitting in the village hut, it seemed to her that it was not happening to her. Stephen arrived in the evening, bringing groceries. The landlady met him in the yard. Oh, my nephew has arrived? Camille was delighted. Come on in, sweetheart, just for what it's worth and the weight of it all. I still have everything. Oh, Auntie, for spare. Or you'll suddenly remember that you have no salt or sugar. And I had a free hour, so I decided to look in, he said embarrassedly. Well, happening, replied the old lady, and winked at the guy Emily in the house. The girl, seeing Stephen, suddenly blushed out of the blue. Hello, she muttered. Hello. Listen, suddenly daring, said Stephen. And let's be on a first-name basis. What are we all going to buy? Come on, smiled Emily, a little surprised. I brought a cake there. Let's try it. I was told at the store that it is very tasty. Soon they were sitting at the table, drinking tea and cake, talking about nothing. Camille sat with them for a while and, saying she had a headache, left. I didn't want to disturb them. The old woman sincerely wanted her nephew to succeed with this girl. Her son's fate was a mess. Maybe Stephen's will work out. You can see she's not a bad girl. After seeing Stephen off, Emily just touched her pillow and fell into a heavy sleep. She was very tired. All her thoughts and worries had come to such a head that she could think of nothing else. Sleep or only sleep. Especially in the morning when must be fresh, full of vigor. She had arranged with Stephen to take her to the hospital. In the middle of the night, she woke up with a terrible pain in her stomach. She struggled out of bed and cried out, bending double. Camille, hearing the scream, jumped up, saw a pale Emily, turning herself on in pain, and realized everything. She immediately called an ambulance. But how could an ambulance go into such a wilderness? The cars are on the other side of the road right now, the dispatcher told her. If you can, at her own speed, Camille dialed her nephew. Oh, Stephen, trouble, she wailed. Emily seems to be throwing out. Throwing who out? Stephen didn't understand. You dummy! You're the baby. I can't help her. Does she need to go to the hospital? Stephen understood everything without words, and in half an hour was already in the village. In his arms, he took Emily into the car and drove her around. Bear with me, girl, bear with me, he said, pushing the old yearling to the maximum speed. The district hospital didn't want to admit a woman who wasn't registered in their neighborhood. It was only when Camille intervened that they even took her to the hospital. An hour later, the doctor came out. The baby wasn't saved. He told Camille and her nephew. Who is she to you, anyway? A good friend, Camille said. Oh, too bad about the baby. It's all right. She's strong, young. She'll get better soon. She'll have more children, the doctor said, and left. I said, guiltily to Camille. All day long I've been washing the house. One was cut short. I thought she was a country girl, strong. But she wasn't. Oh, what a pity. Well, lament. Stephen said that I'm good now. I took the girl to an abandoned village and left. But you had to go to the field, didn't you? That's the point. When Emily was told the baby wasn't saved, she burst into tears. Why is it like this? I mean, she was trying to save him, keep him safe. It was just her baby. But fate had decreed that he wasn't born. Tunnels and tears. the nurse advised her. So it wasn't fate. Oh, you'll have it all. And 2 days later, Emily was discharged. Stephen picked her up. Stephen even asked my husband to take me to the village to get my things. And then to take you to the station somewhere? Stephen was surprised. I'll go to Moscow again, but the aunt said you had some problems there. Now, there are no problems. Emily grinned sadly. Because there is no child. Stephen just shrugged and started the engine, and all the way he was silent, thinking about something. Emily in the village grabbed her bag and said goodbye to Camille. I'm sorry, old Camille said tearfully. It's my fault. What's your fault? Emily sighed. Then it wasn't fate, and they embraced. Stephen turned the key in the ignition and again remained silent the whole way. At the station, he mumbled that he would go get the ticket himself and went to the station, leaving Emily in the car. 5 minutes later, he literally ran back. No tickets. He got into the car and looked at a puzzled Emily. So what am I supposed to do? Emily wondered. Stephen looked at her, hesitating to say something, and finally made up his mind. You don't go anywhere. Next, let's go to my place. I have a comfortable apartment, not a castle, but you can live. You? Emily blushed. No, I can't do that. Don't think about anything bad, quietly answered Stephen. I won't molest you. You'll just live with me. How's home ruler? Ruler at home? Smiled Emily. It's like Friedenbach. Can you bake buns? I know how to do everything, said Emily. It's just not right. It feels right. Emily, I really like you, but I promise I won't hurt you. I just need a hostess. A bachelor's not much fun. They'll like it alone. You'll go to your Moscow. And even after a little thought, I agreed. That's how, having arrived in an abandoned village, in a few days she found herself quite a decent district center. It was neighboring to her native region. But Emily did not think of going to her mother. Better at Stephen's, as an almost Friedenbach. Stephen was so pleased. He liked the girl at first sight, and when her aunt told him about Emily's pregnancy, he was not at all embarrassed. He was ready to take her in immediately, but he was afraid to scare her away. And then all these events. No, he didn't want to let her go. And he was lying about the tickets. They were the day Emily was going to leave, but he had his own way of doing things. It's been 3 and a bit years. They even got married. She stayed with him briefly as his housekeeper. A couple of months later, they filed an application in the registry office. Emily had fallen in love, and now for real. And now Emily and Stephen have a son, Sebastian. He's a good one. Emily looked at her son and wondered how she had ever lived without him. Sebastian was just a wonderful child, calm, intelligent. He was already in kindergarten. Stephen was also farming, and Emily was working. It so happened that she didn't find a job in her profession. What? But 3 years ago, the orphanage needed a teacher. Emily decided to try herself as an educator. And for the 3rd year, she has been working at the orphanage. It was at the orphanage that she found her son Sebastian. Yes, he was adopted by Stephen and Emily and lived in their family for a little more than 6 months. But during this time, he became the most dear to them. It so happened that during this time, Emily could not get pregnant again. The doctors only said that there was nothing wrong with both Emily's and Stephen's health. But for some reason, there were no children. How worried Emily was. Even suggested Stephen to divorce, but he only took offense, saying, "You do not love, then I love very much." Emily cried, "How can you do without a child? I understand that you want a son or a daughter. I'm empty." "And why do you diagnose yourself?" The doctors said everything's normal. But you realize it's not normal. Stephen just hugged his wife and comforted her. And then Camille, when Camille came to visit them, and he talked some sense into her. "You work at the orphanage," said the old lady Emily. "Here and take a baby there, and then, God willing, it will appear. That's how it often happens. These are time-honored omens. Camille didn't take any more of her words seriously. And then they brought a baby to the orphanage. The boy was 2.5 years old. They took him to the hospital first. They held him there for a while, made sure he was all right, and took him to the orphanage. Mother's a bastard. That's what Evelyn, the superintendent, said. And they sent him to the hospital. Dirty, hungry. He and his dog hid in a kennel from his mother. Imagine, he's not even 3 years old yet, and he's already been through enough. The neighbors saw him eating leftovers from the dog's plate with the dog. And he was more human than his mother. She used to bring men into the house when the boy asked for food, yelling at him, beating him, kicking him out of the house. So he hid in a box with his buddies. Neighbors brought him to the police. You can't beat up a mother like that. Emily was horrified. God gave her a child. She'll put her away, I hope. I don't understand why they give children to such people. It's not right. Evelyn agreed and looked carefully at the teacher. Emily, have you had enough of this boy in Moscow? I understand. Emily was generally loved in the orphanage. Did she know how to get along with them? I was hooked from day one. Looking at him, remembering her failed pregnancy. She even calculated the age her baby could be now. Like Sebastian, but not Fate. Sebastian hardly ever followed Emily's hand. He attached himself to her like a mother. When she left work after her shift, he would sob, and when he saw her again, joy would flash in his eyes. One day, Emily had just entered the room with the babies, but when he suddenly rushed to her, arms outstretched, and screamed, "Mommy!" Emily then pressed him to her, hugged him, and never gave him to anyone else. What? She and Stephen were allowed to adopt the boy. It was quick. Stephen was only too happy to have a little man in their home. Now their family had a special sense, had a future. Camille approved of the act of his nephew and his wife. Now for sure, they would have children of their own. The omen was true, but a year passed, 2, 3. The family's own baby never arrived, but even Stephen wasn't too sad about it. They had Sebastian. Trouble happened the year Sebastian first went to first grade. It was the middle of September. Stephen was finishing up the harvest, driving back from the field in the late afternoon in his truck. Tired to the impossibility of his railroad crossing, completely lost his vigilance. Traffic light was on and the signal was crossing, and he was almost falling asleep. How he could not notice the approaching train is incomprehensible, but Stephen jumped out onto the crossing just as the speeding train was already bearing down on him. The car was thrown aside and the locomotive whistled desperately. Stephen survived, but he was badly shaken. He injured his spine.
Emily was on duty at his bedside day and night, leaving Sebastian in the care of old grandmother Valia. At first, the doctors didn't make any predictions. Stephen was too heavy, and then they said he would survive.
But there's little chance Stephen will ever get back on his feet. There is one chance, said the surgeon. They do this kind of surgery in Moscow, but it costs a lot of money, and you need rehabilitation. Emily listened and realized with horror that she would never be able to raise such money, even if she sold all her property, the farm. What to do? She tried to get a loan from the bank, but it wasn't approved. Camille called her son Kevin, who all this time never lived with his last wife, and told him about the family's distress and the only chance she had. "Stephen!" Kevin exclaimed. "What a misfortune!" "Yes, it's expensive." "Oh, of course. I don't know what I can do to help, but I'll think about it." Camille just sighed. She would think about it. He was a fool and he still is. "Emily told me about this conversation?" "No. Well, where would the common man get that kind of money?" she said to the old woman. "That's right," agreed Camille. "What are we going to do?" Emily just shrugged her shoulders and sighed heavily. She was at a loss. Stephen was promised to be discharged by spring. Just discharged, because that's the way it should be. He'd been in the hospital for over 6 months, and her beloved will have to lie there for the rest of her life. How will she cope? What's Stephen gonna be like? She'll have to quit her job, take care of her husband, and what will she live on? How will Sebastian be raised? They didn't get a penny from the state because they adopted the boy.
No, she didn't regret it. Sebastian really was her own child, and she shouldn't have to pay for it. But what to do now? And then a miracle happened. It was a month after Stephen was moved home. The apartment became like an infirmary.
Endless procedures, medications, and treatments. Stephen kept well, never once threw tantrums at his wife, as is the case with the bedridden. On the contrary, he told her how hard it was for her. It's okay. Honey even smiled. Sebastian, at his father's bedside, was constantly reading stories to him or doing homework nearby, until Stephen started writhing in pain. Then the little boy would run to his room, and Emily would give him painkiller shots. And that was it for a month. And then the phone rang. Emily asked her unfamiliar male voice, "I finally found you. Who are you?" Emily was surprised. "I'm a notary and lived in Christopher. I have a will from Robert, and that I don't know such a man. He didn't know you either. But the thing is, Robert had a son named Charles. He died a few years ago in an accident. I don't understand you. Why would I?" Emily was about to hang up the phone when the notary literally screamed, "Yes, because you're raising his son." "How's that?" Emily was stunned. "I'm sorry that I unwittingly revealed the secret of adoption, but I had to roast all the orphanages in your area before I came to you. If you don't believe me, call your superintendent." "I talked to her today. The thing is, Sebastian Robert left all his assets. He has no other relatives. He's been living in his room for the last 4 years. He has a huge fortune. Sebastian is the heir."
That's a bullshit answer. Even I don't believe you. It's a hoax. Our Sebastian couldn't have such rich relatives. I'm hanging up, Emily. I'll throw you the address in Moscow where you should come to familiarize yourself with the documents, and I'll explain everything to you in detail, the notary said quickly. Emily wouldn't listen to him again. She pressed the disconnect button. For a few seconds, Emily sat there confused, twisting the star with the receiver. A text message rumbled in her hands. Next, she looked at the notary's website. Then she called Evelyn. "Sorry for the late call." Emily looked at her watch. It was already loud in the evening. But there was something strange going on. Emily interrupted her. "I'm so sorry. I gave away your secret. The thing is, I got a call from a man in Moscow. I know he called me too. I don't believe him. But I did. I confessed. He was very convincing. I won't go to the police. I won't report you for divulging the adoption. I respect you. But how could you do something like that?" Emily blabbed to the first person she met. She has a first responder, and he was very convincing. I really believed he was looking for Sebastian. What does Sebastian have to do with it? "Ace," shouted Emily. "Don't you remember who his real mother is? A country bumpkin who got a sentence. How could she, living in Siberia, give birth to the son of some millionaire?" "He's delusional. I don't think it's nonsense. The thing is that Adriana worked in the capital as a waitress. She came home with a belly, and the villagers said that she later regretted Sim as her, circled around and left her. Rich guy in Moscow. That's nonsense." "Emily, it's nothing. It's nothing. I'll have to check it out. When that notary explained it all to me, I didn't even think about the license. I thought about Stephen. Oh, what does that have to do with my husband? This Robert has a clinic in Israel. That's where they do this kind of surgery. Just like Stefan. The notary told you that too. but I didn't tell him everything right away. I read about Davidovich on the internet, about the notary himself. There's a very good chance it's true. Maybe it's a chance to secure your son's future, and God willing, help your husband. I still don't believe it. Mumbled. And then I studied all night and thought about what to do. In the end, I decided to go to Moscow. I hired a nurse for my husband while he was away. I decided to take Sebastian with me, as there was no one to leave the boy with. Only Camille, but she's already so old. By the way, Camille immediately believed in the story of the millionaire. But there's more to it than that. She said, "Keep going. I'll tell my sins to meet him." Told Emily and Stephen, of course, and that was it. He understood everything, talked, just didn't get up at all. Not even quietly, he said. "Be careful." "I'll be fine," Emily smiled. "Kevin will meet me." "Kevin? Okay. But maybe you shouldn't take Sebastian with you." "I'd feel better that way, Stephen. I mean, the school year's over. Let the kid go for a ride, get some new experiences." "Yeah, you're right." "Yeah. And I realize we're probably going to need a DNA test. How do we prove that Sebastian is the grandson of this millionaire?" "If that's the case, Emily, he's our son. Who cares whose grandson he is? I'm cute, and I think so too. But a lot could depend on the outcome." Emily told her husband
Husband about the clinic. "And what makes you think they'll agree to help me? How?" "We became parents to Sebastian and Stephen. Is this your chance to get you back on your feet? I love Sebastian very much and I wouldn't give him to anyone.
But maybe you can be helped." Emily was sure she was doing the right thing and there was no stopping her. And what could Stephen do? He agreed with his wife. Soon, Emily and her son were on their way to Moscow.
Sebastian was so excited about the trip. He was told that they were going on a little trip and would soon be walking to Red Square. In the capital, Emily and Sebastian met Kevin. "You look so big already."
Kevin smiled and shook the boy's hand. "Good boy." Then he winked at Emily. "Did you bring greetings from your mother?" "Of course," smiled Emily. "Camille, she said she was expecting you and your family to visit. And I guess she added that he was a jerk." Kevin laughed. Emily blushed a little, and Kevin laughed even harder. They walked to the car, talking about Kevin, whom Emily had only seen
Seen a few times. He never seemed like a dork, as Camille had said. Well, just very affectionate. He'd calm down now. He even had a small trucking company. He's a normal guy. And he loves his fifth wife very much. And they have a son, Ethan, a great kid, a little older than Sebastian. Betty, Kevin's wife, welcomed them well, fed them from the road, offered them a rest. "Tomorrow you'll go to your notary," she said. "Tonight we'll spend time together."
Betty suggested a trip to the zoo, a walk in the park with the boys. "Kevin will go to work and we'll walk around town," she winked conspiratorially. "Emily and Sebastian will eat cotton candy. You even need to unwind a little. It's a shame, but God willing, things will get better." Just so. But she liked the woman's suggestion. She really said that Sebastian went to walk the streets of the capital. They were coming back after work and decided to sit in a cafe. They sat at a table with appetite for cakes and ice cream, even salty chat about nothing. Suddenly, Emily heard an exclamation nearby. She raised her head and was simply stunned. At the table stood John, very soon her first boss, her first love. Now he looked a little older, tired, but still confident, successful.
"Emily, are you?" he said in surprise. "You didn't. Go away," she said quietly. "But why?" John grinned. "I want to sit and chat. Introduce me to your company." "Mom." "Who is it?" asked Sebastian, looking at John. Mom? Repeated John. That's it. So I'm a guy who's an old acquaintance and friend of your mom's. What's your name? Oh, Sebastian? The boy answered plaintively. How old are you? I'll be 8 in February. So John changed his face, looked at Emily meaningfully. Sebastian, not talking to strangers, said Emily sharply. And it was time for us to go. Betty looked at her in surprise and got up too. The boys reluctantly followed their mothers. John remained seated. He kept his eyes on the boy. And then he called someone. Who was it? Asked Betty Emily at home. My past, she admitted, but it was a long time ago and it wasn't true enough to remember. Betty nodded understandingly and didn't ask any more questions. In the morning, when Emily and Sebastian came out of the driveway, John met them. What do you want? Emily asked him rudely. Are you following me? I'm not, John answered cheekily. My people found out where you are. Oh, it also turned out that your son Evan was born just at the time when my child was to be born. Emily, will you admit it? Is that my son? It's not your son, Emily replied sharply and wanted to pass. But John blocked her way. Everything fits the timing. It's my baby. I found out all about you. Retired from the orphanage, taking care of her sick husband. No money in the family. You really think I can't take your son away from you? Take who away? Emily grinned. Sebastian. He's not yours, my son. I can see he's brunette, like me. Brown eyes. He looks like me. Emily became ridiculous with these arguments. And you're ready to recognize all those boys as yours.
Don't be ridiculous. I know Sebastian's date of birth. That's my son. That's when Kevin came out of the entryway, going back to his apartment to get his forgotten cell phone. Is there a problem? He asked John.
Looked at the impressive size of Kevin, suddenly withdrew silently. Don't think you can run away now, he muttered to Emily. Kevin looked after the departing John. Emily, what was that? It's just a mistake of youth. What did he say about Sebastian? Bullshit, Emily replied.
That Sebastian was adopted. Kevin knew, of course, but to talk about it in front of the boy, he realized he couldn't. Notary. He was very happy when he saw Emily and the boy on the doorstep of his office. You were very right to come with us, child, he said. Robert left his biomaterial at the clinic in case a grandson was found. We'll do a DNA test right away, so there's no doubt. Okay, Emily agreed. But I have one condition. She asked Kevin to wait outside the door. If it turns out that the child is Robert's grandson, there is one favor we can ask. Oh, what? The notary was surprised. Don't worry, no one will take the child away from you. You will also raise him. It's just that he will now have a secure future. I understand that. But my husband is Sebastian's father. Yes, he's a father, because he loves him and he's been raising him for years. Well, Stephen's been in trouble. After the accident, he can't walk, he can't get up at all. The doctors say he needs an emergency operation on his spine. It's very expensive. Time is running out. I don't have that kind of money. And I found out that Robert has a clinic in Israel that does this kind of surgery. Is that right? Yes, Robert was a surgeon from God. He worked for many years in the Soviet Union. Then he went abroad, opened his clinic for people, treated them, but did not save himself. He died of cancer. I think if it is confirmed that Sebastian is Robert's grandson, then after that, you can contact the clinic directly and solve this issue. I see. And I'd rather not publicize the situation. They think of us as parents. We love him. If this gets out, the press could make a big deal out of it. It's probably too soon to ask about all this. It's been through. Nothing's been confirmed yet. I did not believe at first that such a thing could happen. Sebastian's biological mother, a down-and-out woman from the Siberian countryside. And nevertheless, it seems to be true. Robert had a son, the notary told me, named Charles. Everything in Robert's life was going well. His son was always in trouble, but Charles was studying at the institute when his mother, Robert's wife, died. And if with his mother, the son was still a little restrained, then after her death he went on a rampage. Robert was already living abroad, but Charles did not want to leave Russia. Everything suited him here. He drank and partied. Then he was kicked out of the institute. He got mixed up with a waitress, then dumped her. Adriana was the girl's name. When she left for her homeland, she called Charles and told him she was having a baby. She hoped he'd come to his senses. Charles sent her away. Then, a few years later, he confessed to his father that he might have a son or daughter. Soon, Charles died after drinking and driving. Robert was very worried, perhaps against this background, and manifested his illness. Realizing that he would soon be gone, he hired detectives to find the child. It took about a year to find her. It became known that Adriana had indeed given birth to a boy, and the timing agreed that it could be Charles's child. Adriana was useless to communicate with. After the termination of her parental rights and her time in prison, she sank even lower. I found out she was dead, frozen in the winter. I didn't know. And I found out in Moscow, smiled Christopher. But it didn't matter.
We could not understand for a long time where the child in the orphanage in no way did not go to use. Then the manager finally confessed. That's how I found you. I see. Christopher's starting to breed here. Let's go to the clinic and get the test done right away. And when the results come back, I'll call you.
They went out into the hallway. Sebastian and Kevin were sitting by the door. The notary looked at the boy and smiled. What kind of analysis is this? It is clear that Sebastian is Robert's grandson. Sebastian never understood why they had gone to that clinic. Mom said it was an examination. Why? He came to Moscow to rest, not to the hospital. But the boy decided that if he had to, he had to. But all the formalities were observed. And then Kevin took Emily and her son to his home. They had to wait 10 days. The time seemed to drag on forever. Emily called Camille's husband, the caregiver, every day. We're fine, the grandmother and husband reassured her. We just missed you, and we missed you. But we'll figure it all out, and then we'll come, Emily answered. And one more thought kept Emily on her toes. John, no, she hasn't loved him for a long time. When she met Stephen, all her previous life seemed alien, as if it wasn't even her. And Stephen was the only one she was happy with. And she would be. Emily somehow believed that everything would work out. Miracles do happen. If Sebastian is the grandson of this millionaire, that will solve everything. If not, he'll think of something else. It won't make them love Sebastian any less.
And yet, John, he suddenly decided that Sebastian was his son. The last thing Emily wanted to do was talk to that man. Let him make up his own mind. One day, walking in the park with her son, she met
John again. Now he was with Jean. Over the years, Jean seemed to have hardly changed. The same slender, youthful, only the look of blue eyes became even more prickly. "Hello, my dear." Gina unceremoniously approached Emily.
"Hello, Jean." Emily even smiled. "John told me everything yesterday." "So you have a son?" "Yes." Emily smiled. "Sebastian, go play." Nearby was a
Was left with John and his wife. It was a strange feeling. Emily looked calmly at this aunt and the one she had previously seemed to love so much. The ones who had caused her so much worry in her life, but now Emily was completely indifferent to them. John stood there with an important look, thinking that he had everything in his hands. But Emily was no longer the young, foolish girl who could be easily intimidated. And what could this John possibly demand of her? What a good boy. Jean sang sweetly, looking at Sebastian riding down the slide. John, he looks just like you. I can see it too, John answered and glared at Emily. So that's how the baby is going to be taken away from you anyway. What are you saying? Emily smiled. And on what basis will I prove that this is my son? And you treat your invalid. How quickly you found out everything about me, Emily replied. Only you won't be able to do anything. She turned around and went to her son. Mom, look how I can do it, shouted Sebastian, rolling his head. Go. Sebastian, so Emily couldn't be neater. Then the boy took a little ride on the swing, and they went home. All this time, John and Jean sat on the bench and looked at Sebastian, whispering about something. Emily decided not to tell them anything about the Babel. Who were they to let them in on the details of her life? I mean, John was the reason everything happened back then. If she hadn't run away from Moscow, if she hadn't had to hide in the middle of nowhere, Emily could have had her baby now. But then there would be no her. The next day, Emily got a call from the guardianship office. Emily, there's something wrong, said Kathy, the warden. We've had a request from Moscow. A John claims that your Sebastian, his son, is requesting genetic testing. And, I understand, wants to take the child away from you, Stephen. Emily, I'm calling because I know you. I'll send everyone away, but you need to be prepared. Sebastian's real father may have shown up. Emily wanted to tell Kathy that it was unlikely, but then she'd have to tell her the whole situation. And Emily didn't want to set up her boss, Evelyn, and didn't want any unnecessary talk at all to everyone around them. They had just gone with their son to Moscow to find out about the operation for Stephen. Kathy, don't worry. It's just me, she replied. Everything will be fine. Thank you for the warning. John never appeared near Emily again, but she realized that her former lover was preparing the documents for the court to take Sebastian away from her. And she was a little relieved by the situation. Let him try. It won't work. If the kinship of the millionaire Robert and Sebastian is still in doubt, the fact that John could be the father of her son is not taken seriously at all. It can't be. 10 days later, the result of the examination came back. Sebastian and Robert were close relatives. A notary, Christopher, immediately invited Emily to his office. I will take care of all the paperwork for the inheritance. The boy will receive the bulk of the funds when he comes of age. And now a certain amount will be allocated monthly for his maintenance. You have the right to dispose of it, the notary explained. Thank you, nodded the stunned Emily. She had been prepared for this turn of events, but she still couldn't believe it. Now, there was no need to worry about her son's future, at least on the material side. I remember our conversation about your husband, said Christopher. And I decided to talk to the present management of the clinic myself. It's now run by Robert's best friend, Michael. This will be the case until Ivan grows up and decides what he wants to do with the clinic. So now Michael has figured it out and says that Robert would definitely help the man who is raising his grandson. They will contact you soon, solve the issues with the transportation of the patient. Don't worry, I'm sure that your husband will definitely be helped there. By the way, I found out about the clinic in Moscow that the doctors told you about. They don't do this kind of surgery. What do you need? Well, it's a kind of providence that Sebastian and the clinic worked out this way. I can't believe it's true, Emily said through her tears. Thank you. It's too soon to thank you. When you heal your husband, then I'll listen to your thanks. In the meantime, go home and raise Sebastian. By the way, Sebastian won't get a proper education where you live.
You should move to the city. Yes, you are right. But we will come back to this question a little later, when Stephen is cured.
Right, agreed the notary. And on the way out of the office, Emily turned around. There's one other arrangement that still stands. Which one? surprised the notary. To keep everything as secret as possible, do not make a fuss about the fact that the dead millionaire found a grandson. We are non-public people. We don't need that. For my part, I promise you will do as you please, replied the notary. Although everything will come to light after a while anyway. Remember that all secret things come to light? Emily and her son went home. Kevin and Betty saw them off at the train station. Come visit us again, Kevin said. And tell your mother hello. Late, she worries. I'm not a dummy anymore, as she likes to say. And I'll take her out of her wilderness soon. She lives like a farm. Good for you, nodded Emily. Take her. I asked her to come to my place, but she doesn't want to. I think she's just waiting for you to take her. Of course I will. She's my mom. She's a very nice person. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have met Stephen. Yes, but get well, take care of your affairs. Good luck to you. Then they got on the train and waved to Kevin and his family through the window. They're good. The train moved on. The train station's behind us. Even looked out the window and remembered how she had fled this town back then. Could she have thought her life would take such a turn? No, of course not. She was traveling at her own risk to her birth mother back then. Emily's heart clenched at the thought of her mother. All these years, she tried to establish a relationship with Christina, but she would not contact her. Emily even bought the exact same earrings, which secretly took from her mother Christina earrings. Torxra and still said that not her daughter nor Emily. Us, Emily cried. She and Stephen had only been married a year. Her husband consoled her as best he could. He said she didn't want to communicate and didn't need to. It's a shame. I'm her daughter, she sobbed into her hands. And then I calmed down and decided to let my mother live, as she wanted. But still from time to time, she found out how she was drinking there. The neighbors would talk, and the roommate was different. Emily convinced herself that if her mother was happy with this life, nothing could be changed. And only once a month, she sent postal orders to Christina. It wouldn't matter if it went through or not. Maybe it would be a pittance for bread. Her mother. Emily had just returned from the capital when she got a call from the Israeli clinic. The same Michael. In pure Russian, he clarified all the nuances, asked to email all the documents Stephen, promised to call again, and he did. I was pleased with Emily and Stephen. The operation is possible, and the chances of recovery are high. But how to get from the Siberian countryside to distant Israel? Especially when a person does not move. Stephen immediately became discouraged, even though he was excited at first. It's impossible. But a few days later, two sturdy men came to Emily's house. They introduced themselves as friends of the late Robert and said that they would now accompany Stephen to the clinic. Oh, I have to go too, Emily said confusedly, realizing that she had to go somewhere else. Why? One of the men was sincerely surprised. We will organize everything ourselves. There will be medical escort, private plane. Emily was confused. Where's that kind of money? I'll get it. Don't even worry about it. We're aware of the situation. You did a good thing. If Robert were alive, I'd have seen my grandson. Sebastian really looks like him, doesn't he? We can see that you're great parents, and your husband's treatment is only a small part of the thanks. Oh, if only Robert were alive. Thank you, whispered Emily, heartbroken. The same day, Stephen was taken away. Emily gave her husband a big kiss. She told him to obey the doctors. I will, Stephen promised. And you take care of your son. Sebastian also kissed his father and asked him to come back quickly. Stephen smiled back, although there was anxiety in his eyes. How would it be? A few weeks had passed. Stephen had already had the operation, and there was a long rehabilitation ahead of him. For about a year, everything was normal for him. Emily and her husband called each other regularly. With all this worry, she even forgot about the other problem of John's threats. Although she thought they were so funny, he had nothing to do with their family. But one day, John even called and said that he had contacted lawyers who would take Sebastian away from her and give it to him in no time. I don't get it, Emily grinned. Hadn't you found any other girl to bear you a child over the years? Nothing with others has worked out, John answered her. Jean even did the echo. All to no avail. It turns out that only Sebastian is mine. Why did you run away from us then? I was taking the baby away from you anyway. I have money, connections, the best lawyers, the best attorneys. Emily laughed. And they're already working on it. They have. What are you trying to say? I'm saying you can't have my son because he's mine alone. What are you talking about? Who's his father if not me? I want to upset you, but it's not you. There's no such thing. Okay, I'll tell you the truth, but only to get you off my back and away from me and my family once and for all. Yes, I was pregnant by you, and I ran away from you then, so lucky. But I lost the baby when I was 3 months pregnant. That can't be true, exclaimed John. Sebastian, he's my copy. You just want to see yourself in him. He has a different father. It doesn't work. John laughed, in full confidence that Emily was already from Sebastian's birthday. The timing's right, but it's not working either, before I even teased him. Sebastian has a different biological father and a different biological mother. I don't get it. Is he adopted? Not yours. He's my nearest and dearest. But he was born to another woman? You're Liang. Scream at John. I'll demand an examination. Yes, please. Emily replied indifferently and hung up the phone. John did not call her again. Apparently, the lawyers found out about the boy's real relatives and convinced John to forget the whole story. It had been about a year. All this time, Stephen was abroad for treatment. Things were going very well for him. And as it was close to autumn, he stepped off the plane at the airport. With his own feet came out even Sebastian. They greeted him eagerly. As soon as he appeared, the boy threw himself on his neck with a cry of, "Daddy!" Emily only had time to hold Sebastian. "Son, Daddy can't take this kind of strain yet," she said. "It's all right," Stephen laughed. "I'll soon carry you in my arms." "But that will be a little later. For now, just a hug." Emily smiled. "Honey, we missed you so much." And they hugged, all three of them. The closest of kin, the most beloved, together now. And a year later, a lot of things changed for Emily and her family. Stephen stopped farming. After that trauma and major surgery, he still had to take care of himself. He was first called to the Department of Agriculture, and then invited to the regional center to work there in the department. Stephen, of course, accepted immediately. Emily was so worried. What would she do in the city? But the fact that her son will be better there, she understood the other education, medicine. Although without work and did not even sit. Very soon she got a job as a school teacher. Stephen and Emily realized that they had made the right choice. The city was their future. From the outside, they looked like an ordinary family. No fabulous money spent. Sebastian didn't need anything of the sort, though. All his money was waiting for the boy to grow up. And Sebastian never realized who it was. Robert was that had helped his daddy get well. Yes, Emily and Stephen still haven't told the boy about his origins. They think they will soon. In the meantime, the most incredible thing has happened in their lives. The three of them went to the capital for the holidays. Camille was now staying with Kevin and Betty. And now the old lady couldn't brag about her son. Was she glad to be with children in her old age? Why had she spent so many years in the middle of nowhere? So Emily and Stephen and Sebastian decided to visit her. What is this idea? Pale, looking under holy eyes at Emily, said Camille. Is she sick or what? Yes, the road was tiring. She even complained that she had been nauseous since morning. The old woman raised her eyebrows. Oh, Camille, I know what you're thinking, but I don't think so. You know my story better than anyone. I know it. But you have the face of a pregnant woman, the old woman replied. Trust me. Emily just waved her hand. In the evening, when she was walking down the street with her husband and son, she suddenly felt sick. Almost fainted Stephen, frightened at her. She called an ambulance and went straight to the first hospital. What do you want? The doctor was surprised, studying the result of the blue test. This happens in the first trimester. In what trimester, Pale? Not even in the first trimester. Yumon, you didn't know, smiled the doctor. You already have a child. Women can tell these things ahead of all the tests, especially those who've lived. Emily wasn't going to explain. She just sat in the doctor's office and couldn't believe the miracle. She was having a baby. When she walked out of the office, her husband and son stood up as if on cue. But what? They almost asked with glee. We're having a baby, Emily whispered excitedly. Sebastian, you will have either a brother or a sister. Well, at last, exclaimed the boy. Then it was all one-on-one. Stephen and Emily laughed. Honey, I'll carry you in my arms from now on, he whispered, kissing his wife tenderly. Carry you? I don't mind. She answered him. That's how they visited the capital, gained new impressions, and brought important news. But neither Emily nor Stephen told anyone about it. They even asked their son to keep quiet. For now. Don't I understand? 11-year-old Sebastian replied angrily. Of course I'll keep quiet. Happiness loves silence? Wow, smiled Emily. How do you know that expression? I don't remember. He just heard it somewhere. The boy waved his hand. Mom, Dad, I'll run outside to the boys. Of course, the parents agreed. And then, looking out the window, they watched their Sebastian playing with the boys in the yard. How fast he is growing up and how much he doesn't know yet. But the time will come. Sebastian will know everything, and he won't love them any less. Emily and Stephen are sure, because they're raising their son right.